Not gonna lie, things look bleak for the Bucks in the third quarter, but they found a way to win in the fourth. What did the Bucks do differently down the stretch to get this win? We'll break down the pivotal first fourth quarter plus more on the other side of the intro.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What it do? Welcome to Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis, an NBA analyst with the Locked On Network and co-host of the Technical Foul Podcast. Joining me is Frank Madden, longtime voice of the pod, founder of brewhoop.com, and we appreciate you for tuning in and making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube, and you can catch us in newsletter form. So head over to lockedondaily.com and sign up for the free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, Frank, as I mentioned, it was looking bleak there in the third quarter. Before we started recording, I mentioned it was feeling similar to the first Clippers game this season where things just really started to unravel in the third quarter. First game, Bucks didn't figure out a way to regain that rope. But in this one, they found a way, and it felt like it took a little bit from everybody to pull this one off. We had 6 different Bucks players scoring in double figures, including all 5 starters. And like I said, they had to dig deep for this. When they went into the third quarter, up by 7 points, walked into the fourth quarter down by 9. In your opinion, what sparked the Bucks' fourth quarter comeback?
Well, I think the fourth quarter comeback was Giannis Antetokounmpo playing on a minutes limit. We didn't know what it was going to be coming off of the left calf injury that kept him out through the All-Star break. It looked like apparently it was 24 or 25 minutes because he exited midway through the fourth. And I certainly was hoping he'd come back and I was already preparing my complaints, Camille, saying medical staff run amok. You know, if the Bucks had lost this game, like, 26 minutes, his calf would have exploded. I mean, I'm curious to see if he plays, Friday night. My guess is he probably sits out, but in that case, like all the more like questioning, like can you not get him back out there for like the final 2 minutes? But thankfully, Camille, we're still down 5 when Giannis went to the bench about midway through the fourth quarter, and the rest of the group stepped up and finished off this game, and ultimately won with less drama than certainly I was expecting, especially after Bogdanovic hit that late 3 that cut it to 2. So, yeah, I mean, I think Giannis's early fourth quarter just like he just went to work with Zubats on the bench in particular. Kind of had everything working. Scored, I think, he had only 13 points in the first 3 quarters, but mostly because he just didn't play many minutes. And then in those first 6 minutes, scores 10 quick points, just kind of trying to will the Bucks back into this game. But certainly this was not just a Giannis story, right? And I think that's the important part. And certainly you don't win this game with Giannis playing only 24 minutes, if not for other guys. And I think, what did we say, Camille, right before the break? Brook Lopez, we said, Brook Lopez, Iron Man for this Bucks team, just had not looked as impactful the last couple weeks, 2-3 weeks before the All-Star break. Was he a guy who was going to really, hopefully, glass half full, you think, hopefully he's a guy that benefits from just getting like a week off to recharge and maybe get some more energy back into those legs. And we saw it kind of very early on in this game. And then more importantly, we saw it late in this game, 2 huge blocks in the fourth quarter for Brook. He hit big threes all night. Had a 3-point play in the fourth quarter and a 3, I think, in the fourth quarter. 22 points from him. The offense has been very inconsistent from him. A lot of it's just a reflection, I think, of kind of his role and just, some nights he gets touches, some nights he doesn't. Some nights the 3 ball's working, some nights it isn't. But I thought Brook was massive, and especially at the start of this, Bobby Portis-less third of the season, obviously it puts an extra degree of pressure on Brook as well as Kyle Kuzma. Giannis, of course, always has that pressure and takes it very easily. But But I thought Brook was huge tonight, especially given how good Zubats is, and he
Yeah.
was very good tonight. But I think Zubats was a -8, I want to say, so they were able to sort of survive the Zubats minutes better than I would have expected. I was a little surprised, honestly, that Zubats was a -8, because it
Yeah.
always
And they
feels
struggled
like,
with him in that first matchup too.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think certainly Giannis in the fourth quarter, getting them back into the game, giving them a chance in the first half of the fourth quarter. Brook, his big contributions all night. Dame, basically kind of MIA for 3.5 quarters, seemingly. But the next thing you look, I mean, had made one shot, only made 2 shots on the night, but
Yeah.
15 points on 12 shots because 9 out of 10 free throws. He baited a couple of 3-point fouls, 7 rebounds, 7 assists, and had one big three in the fourth quarter, and then made a whole bunch of free throws to seal the game late. So even Dame, on a night where it was pretty forgettable, he came through. And then
Mhm.
I think the other guy, that needs to be called out is Kevin Porter Jr. for what he
Absolutely.
did late in the third quarter, just keeping the Bucks like close. He just went on a tear, and they were still they were still down 9 points, I think, going into the fourth quarter.
Yep.
And so, I mean, they were really just barely hanging on. But if not for his scoring binge in that third quarter, he had 13 points on 7 shots. He was +8 in only 15 minutes. I mean, if he doesn't do that against his former team, it could have been a 15, 16 point lead, and it might have all been
Mhm.
academic. So yeah, I think honestly, even though the defensive numbers were like okay, like his defensive rating was like 113, 114 tonight, I thought the defense was really solid for most of the night. I think the Bucks' horrible turnover problems,
It was just
especially in the
in
third
that third
quarter,
quarter.
exactly. I thought that really, was unfortunately took the wind out of a lot of kind of some pretty good things they were doing in terms of the positional defense that they played on Harden and Kawhi. Both of those guys had pretty mediocre shooting nights. They still got their 24 and 25 points, but I thought they defended those guys pretty well. And no Norm Powell, which helped. And other than that, I think this was a good effort, and both teams shot 40% from three, so there wasn't like
Mhm.
a huge benefit there. And fortunately, Bucks again, turnovers. They had 6 more turnovers. They had 3 fewer offensive rebounds. So again, that math problem that we've talked about was again
Mhm.
an issue. The Clippers had 8 more shots. But the Bucks did get 8 more free throws to kind of even things up a bit. And obviously they haven't been a great clutch team this year, but they came through when it mattered tonight, and pretty damn important win coming out of the break, especially not knowing who's going to be playing tomorrow night in Washington.
Truly, truly. I'm glad that you brought up Kevin Porter Jr. and his scoring in the third quarter, because I thought that was like the beginning of the fourth quarter comeback, although it happened to end the third. He scored the last 9 Bucks points of the third quarter, and they needed every single bucket just to keep them connected to the Clippers after giving up. What they got outscored in the third quarter by like 16 points or something like that. So they needed every single bucket.
Nine turnovers. I think 9 of their 17 turnovers, I think, came in that quarter. I mean, it was
They
just
had more turnovers in the third quarter than they had made field goals. They had 9 turnovers and 8 made field goals in the third quarter. Like, it was crazy. They had no flow offensively because they just kept turning the ball over, and then they weren't able to get stops. And again, it felt like it was going to be a repeat of the last game against the Clippers, but they were able to figure it out. And to your point about Giannis setting the tone for the team in the fourth quarter, even though he did not play to close it, he really did set that tone. Like you mentioned, he came out, he scored 10 points of his own, and then he assisted on the AJ Green 3 and the Dame 3 right before he checked out. So like, he was accountable for the first 16 points the Bucks scored in the fourth quarter. You mentioned Brook Lopez, who has now in the 6th time of his career, 6th season, with at least 100 made threes and 100 blocks, the most in NBA history. Like, he came up clutch defensively for this team down the stretch. Thought he did a good job taking advantage of mismatches as well when they presented themselves to him, and hit some really big shots throughout the game, particularly the second quarter and the fourth quarter for Brook. And the only other guy that I want to make sure we highlight here is just Kuzma, because he kind of started the game off, hit 3 threes in the first quarter, hit his 1003 of his career with his second one. Had some solid rebounding throughout the game and just kind of moved the ball, pushed the pace for the team. And again, a big win for this Bucks team coming out of All-Star break, especially with the news that Bobby Portis is missing 25 games here after the break. And with Bobby's absence in this game, I wondered what we would see from some of the lineups that the Bucks threw out there. And we got our look at the first new look starting five for this Bucks team after the trade deadline here with Giannis healthy. So I do want to talk a bit more about that jumbo Bucks starting lineup and if that's something that could be sustainable throughout the rest of the season. So we'll talk about the lineups and the rotations right after this. NBA fans, get ready. If they swoosh, you save. So thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. So it's simple. When any NBA player scores 50 or more in the game during the 2024-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off of an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. So you could take advantage of that in a few different ways, right? You could be up late watching highlights. You just need a midnight snack. You can use that DoorDash real quick. Boom, boom, hit that door pass, grab something to eat really quick while saving some money. Or if it's the next day, you got that lunch, like, hey, need something quick and easy? Hit up DoorDash, get that DoorDash Dash Pass, get your favorite meals with no delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, again, you can save even more now with this particular NBA offer. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. Again, any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off of an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. We got our first look at the new starting lineup for this Milwaukee Bucks team here. Doc went with Dame, Taurean Prince, Kyle Kuzma, Giannis, and Brook, a really jumbo lineup. I thought that we wouldn't see Andre Jackson Jr. in the starting lineup with Kuz there, but was a little surprised to see Taurean Prince be that guy. I definitely thought it would be AJ Green, maybe Gary Trent Jr., but Trent felt like a long stretch to me because he has found such a role coming off of the bench, and I figured Doc might want to keep that momentum going. But what did you think of the Bucks' new look starting five here?
Well, I think something we talked about before the break was, my take on the Bucks, and if there's an angle for this Kuzma edition, like what is it? How does it allow the Bucks to build, an advantage? And we've talked a lot about the need to be able to play smaller with Giannis at the five. In theory, I think Kuzma could do that as a four. I thought his switchability was we saw it on display tonight. I thought he had some really good defensive possessions, switching either onto Harden, and I thought he had some very good possessions against Kawhi tonight, which is not easy because Kawhi is
A bucket.
built he's built like just a bull, and gets to his mid-range spots, and he's just really tough to contest and to hold down. So I think, I hope, and we're going to probably have to see some of that small lineup stuff with Bobby out in particular. I don't think we wanted to have to see, we wanted to force Doc into those situations, which interestingly, 17 Jericho Sims minutes, we'll talk about that in a moment. I was surprised we saw that much of Jericho Sims, but certainly nobody, especially given how everybody was interested in seeing what he might look like. But I thought, as far as the starting five goes, I've been kind of wondering, like maybe what the Bucks have to lean into is just being big. And certainly Kuzma, I think his, he's not like an explosive athlete, but he's a good athlete, and he gets up and down the floor. He can handle it a bit. He's not like a pick and roll playmaker type guy. We've seen them run some pick and roll. I don't really feel great when he's doing that. Again, especially like when the bar is Khris Middleton, who's just brilliant as a pick and roll guy. But I think my part of my thinking was like, well, maybe the Bucks just need to be bullies. Brook, Giannis, Kuz as your front line is enormous. And certainly with Kuz and Giannis, you actually have some athleticism there. Brook obviously with the shot blocking, and if you are given that your backcourts tend to be smaller, and look, I think AJ Green, obviously defensively, we've sung his praises. Gary Trent certainly has his moments, a little more of a gambler. Those guys can play defense, but they're smaller, right? They're not like super athletic type guys, as we saw with Gary Trent. Another adventure on a breakaway tonight. He misses a dunk.
I couldn't believe he missed
Oh,
that one.
oh gosh. So I thought it was interesting. I wasn't even being the like maybe the Bucks just need to be bullies guy. That's like I guess that's sort of my brand right now. I wasn't even expecting Taurean Prince necessarily to start at the 2, but it was kind of I guess the most extreme version of what I was talking about, which we're just gonna play all of these like 3s and 4s and together, right? So didn't really work.
The numbers, it went great.
It was mainly because the offense was just so rough, and I was trying to think like, is there something about that group that like you just can't run good offense when you have Kuzma at the 3 and Prince at the 2? I mean, I don't think it's like dramatically worse than having Trent or AJ Green at the 2, because it's not like Gary or AJ is like running a bunch of pick and rolls or a dynamic passer, because that's probably Taurean's biggest issue is he's not like a passer, but he's obviously shot the ball extremely well, and he did again tonight. He made big shots, especially in the fourth quarter. He made big shots too. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think part of the issue with it is just Taurean's basically your backup 3, and you got him starting at the 2, and without Bobby, Kuz has to be your backup 4, and he's starting at the 3. So the staggering of lineups also becomes pretty complicated. And I think we saw, I can't remember when Kuz was out. I think Kuz was the first guy to the bench in both halves, or in both first and third quarters. I think Gary Trent came in for him. I know in the third quarter he came in at like the 7:30 mark. So that is obviously very, very fast to be coming in with the change. So I think that just sort of hints at exactly what we're talking about. So it was interesting that I think they seem to be going back to probably what I argued right after Kuzma trade, which is it feels more like Kuz is probably a 6th man on this team. I don't love his fit with Giannis, given he's not like a really reliable floor stretcher. And obviously with Taurean and Gary Trent, you certainly are going more traditional, right, in terms of floor stretcher, spot up guys around Giannis. So I think, and ultimately this ends up being a little bit of a compromise, maybe between kind of the Kuz as 6th man and the just go big as hell sort of approach, because you're not really running those lineups for extended periods. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think in the third quarter, the problem was again the offense probably more than the defense.
Yeah.
So I think those groups tonight, I thought they could defend, and a lot of that honestly was because like the way Harden plays, you saw Taurean Prince.
A lot of ISO.
Yeah, you had probably as much success from Taurean Prince on Harden as anybody else. But let's be honest, that's not like typically what you're going to see against opposing point guards. Harden's just a weirdo, and he's bigger and kind of moves at a different pace than most opposing point guards. So I don't know. Again, the starting lineup has been a problem all year. My thing for a while now has been like the Ajax experiment just hasn't worked. And the offense has been bad, and they, it's just, like Ajax lineups period have not worked this year. Yeah. He's one of the worst on-off guys on the team. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't want to bury him. I think we've talked about it, but I think you just got to figure out, are there more like situational ways to use him? And to be honest, I think this is a game where probably you didn't really need him as much, but you may need him in other situations where you're playing against quicker lead guards. Tonight was obviously not that type of team that you're going up against. So we'll see. But yeah, worth experimenting with this group. But I'm again, like I feel like we'll probably see more different lineups than what we saw tonight.
Probably, and to your point about the way that Harden plays, and even Kawhi, a lot of ISO from their 2 star players there, and with no norm, somebody who tends to get a lot of actions off of down screens and coming off ball and trying to create space that way as well. This jumbo Bucks lineup didn't really have to go through a gauntlet of pick and rolls throughout the game, which I think would be a bigger problem for this team of just screen navigation if they continue to go this route. So I will be curious to see how that shakes out down the stretch against different teams, different matchups. And with this lineup here that they threw out there, Doc still went with a 9-man rotation, even though Giannis was on a minutes restriction in this game, which heading into it, hearing that Giannis and Dame were on minute restrictions, I was like, what does that actually look like for these two because on the season, Giannis is averaging about 35 minutes a game. Dame's averaging about 36 and a half, 37 minutes in the month of January or February. So some heavy minutes for these guys. And tonight, Giannis played 24, Dame played 33. And with the Bobby Portis suspension,
Some
really
minutes.
one
What was Dame's minutes restriction? That's what I'm kind of
that's what
wondering,
I want
right?
to know. Like it was 3 less than what you normally play. So
Mhm.
like, okay, all right, sure. But we saw it clear with Giannis. And with that being in the front court while also not having Bobby Portis, we did see the Bucks debut of Jericho Sims. And the 9-man rotation that the Bucks went with did not include Andre Jackson Jr. at all. So when we come back, want to talk about what we saw from Jericho Sims' debut as a Buck, as well as thoughts on the rotation with Andre Jackson Jr. not in it. Surprise? Is this a one-game thing? Do we think we see him coming back? We'll talk more about that after this. I've said it before and I will say it again. I enjoy playing on FanDuel, especially because, like, when the game tips off and the NBA action is just getting started, there is no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, like what we saw the Bucks do here tonight, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. FanDuel has this live betting feature and it keeps every moment of the game exciting because while you're looking at it, watching the game, you can also look at the app and never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is really easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit fanduel.com to join today. That's fanduel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Bucks fans have been clamoring for Jericho Sims. They've been wanting to see Jericho Sims, and we finally saw him tonight on the court. 17 minutes, as you mentioned, for Jericho Sims on the evening. What did you take away from your first look at Sims in a Bucks uniform? Because his agility stood out to me. He didn't attempt any shots in this game, which didn't necessarily surprise me, but the defense looked pretty solid from him along the way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, he moves really well, right? And I was a bit curious, like when they first acquired him, I was trying to think of clever nicknames that would harken back to Dan Godzarich, and I've yet to figure out a good like Jericho Godzarisms. No, it doesn't really
Got
work
the
that
Sims.
easily. Hit us up on Twitter if you can think of or Blue Sky if you can think of a funny Jericho Sims nickname. But um, yeah, I mean, it was kind of a interesting debut. I mean, I think the most important thing is 17 minutes. I think what was he +8 or something like that. So they won his minutes. And I mean, after seeing obviously we're just talking about Ajax and the troubles they had, obviously scoring enough with Ajax on the floor. And so, I mean, you might ask yourself, like, I mean, Giannis really has not played with just a pure rim rolling center
Mhm.
essentially like since the start of the Bud era, right? Like even John Henson in his brief period with the Bucks before he was traded during Bud's tenure, was shooting threes and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so that's probably like a little bit of a TBD. Like, what do those guys look like playing together? I mean, we know Giannis, like he likes passing down low, playing high low with Brook in particular. I don't know, maybe we'll see Giannis back to throwing lobs like he did Miles Plumlee briefly, 8 or 9 years ago. But yeah, I mean, look, I think we saw like he doesn't have ball skills, so if it's not like an alley oop, like Jericho Sims probably isn't scoring.
Mhm.
Um, I think the thing that probably I was hoping we might see is some of that like athleticism translate into offensive rebounds and sort of second chances and tip ins, things like that. Obviously, no offensive rebounds. I think he did was kind of force a team rebound. Like there was one out of bounds call that I think the Clippers were pretty angry about that he sort of challenged. The Bucks got a second chance on. So I think if for him to kind of earn minutes, I think it's probably, can he be switchable defensively, hold his own? I mean, he's not like overly tall, right? He's listed at 6'9". I thought he had what looked like a really nice block on Zubats down low that got called for a foul, which I thought was kind of a tough luck play for him. So we'll see. I mean, I think, again, like we have to be realistic, right? I don't want to be like the wet blanket. Like Jericho Sims isn't going to like change the Bucks' fortunes or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think I get it. Like especially when Brook has nights where it just seems like he's off, like people want to mash a button to find a solution with somebody else. And with Bobby out, like the options are very limited. So the, red Jericho Sims button is kind of going to be the only one that you feel like is staring at you in the face. So we'll see. I mean, I think certainly the minutes he got tonight, somewhat a product of Giannis's minutes limit as well. So on a normal night, is Jericho Sims going to play at all over this next sort of 24 games without Bobby? I don't know, right? It may be somewhat matchup dependent. But I think we at least saw hints of his mobility on defense. And I think the other thing too is like on offense, I think a guy like Ajax, like the problem with Ajax, I think offensively, what makes him really hard to play is not so much that he doesn't shoot threes well enough, because he shot threes surprisingly well. I think it's the fact that teams don't feel like he's a threat around the basket, or like if he cuts, he's just
they don't respect his game offensively.
Exactly. And I think Sims is at least like normal in the way that he's limited, right? Like Sims will dunk anything around the basket. He's just not going to do anything, when he's away from the basket. So I think he's a more typical type of guy that you can put in the dunker spot. Maybe they can find ways to, utilize him a little bit in pick and rolls and things like that at times, or in transition, whatever it might be. So we'll see. But again, like happy that he was able to finally get some burn, and in a game that, they won. And, the box score contributions were minimal, but certainly didn't hurt them. And yeah, hopefully there's a role for him at various points. Depending, maybe it's matchup dependent, whatever it might be. But yeah, I mean, he's stuck around the NBA for a few years, hasn't necessarily shown a whole lot. But maybe you can unlock a little bit of that athleticism, and that's the thing. I can continually refer to the Bucks as being unathletic, but it's like
they've added athletes.
Yeah, I mean, the three guys that they've added at the deadline, obviously the minute loads are very different among these guys. But Kuzma, I'd say, is a good athlete, and he's versatile, and he can defend multiple positions. And I was, again, really impressed with what he did defensively tonight. The offense, I think, was a little, I got nervous when he was handling
after
the ball.
The first quarter. It was,
not really there. But, Kevin Porter, KPJ is not like a typical, like just nuclear, super athletic type guy. He's more like shifty.
He's agile.
But he's got good size for, certainly as a guy that's playing the one, he's got good size. And I mean, that dunk he had late in the third quarter, like just out of nowhere, two-hand
the next
dunk.
possession down, he had the double pump fake, came with the up and under. I was just like, the touch was crazy.
Yeah. So I think I would say he's certainly a good athlete. And I think the important thing too is like it translates reasonably well on both ends, right? And then of course Sims, like, which, again, like how functional is his athleticism? How much does his athleticism actually translate to like productive basketball plays? Well, that's kind of the hard part for him, but we'll see. So maybe we'll see more Friday night in Washington, given we don't know who's going to be available with Giannis and Dame coming off these injuries.
Yeah, we don't. And I think with Giannis being on that minutes restriction, it does continue to have that door open for Sims to continue to pick up some of these minutes here. Because if Giannis isn't playing 24 minutes tonight and he's playing 34, 10 minutes got to come from somewhere. They're probably going to come out of Sims's workload that he had, because the other three guys in the rotation were guards there. So something to keep an eye on, especially with Doc really committing to using Kuz as that three. He did play, of course, 4 and 5 at some points in the game, but really using him as a three and leaning in to the Bucks using their physicality. Doc has mentioned when he took over the team last year of like, we're old, we're slow, we're not super athletic. We have to use our size to dominate. And this team, after this trade deadline, they have really leaned into just trying to be a bigger physical team, but now they have a few more athletes on board. Tonight, coming out the All-Star break, was the first night of a back-to-back for the Bucks. Friday night in Washington, D.C. to play against the Wizards. Khris Middleton, not on the injury report. So it is expected for him to make his Wizards debut against the Bucks. No Malcolm Brogdon, in case you were wanting to see a full Bucks reunion here. He's out with the left ankle sprain, but
all of the Brogdon fans that still exist among in Milwaukee, but yeah, they'll just have to wait.
The president wanting to see the press come through. I mean, I've already said it. I'm going to watch an ungodly amount of Wizards games as long as Khris is in that uniform. But as we wrap here, Frank, what is your excitement level or just feeling heading into this game, knowing that this is probably the biggest Wizards Bucks game of the season, just given the fact that it's the debut of a Bucks franchise legend over there in Khris Middleton?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think like the last time the Bucks had a guy who left, and then I rooted for that guy against the Bucks. And to be clear, I'm not rooting for the Wizards against the Bucks. But for the most part, Camille, like I'm a pretty much like, when you leave the Bucks, like my fandom I don't want to say like it goes out the window, but I don't I'm not too nostalgic about Xbox. I know when Big Dog left, because as we discussed last week, I was always a Big Dog guy. I definitely rooted for Big Dog, and funnily enough, when he was on the Spurs and they made that he quote unquote won that championship, I enjoyed. He had a couple of runs in the playoffs where he actually made an impact. But for the most part, yeah, like I don't really root a whole lot for guys after leave Milwaukee, but Khris is absolutely probably going to be like the biggest exception to that so far. I would have rooted for Drew, to be clear, as well, but a little hard when he's going to the Boston of all places. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I'm going to be like watching Wizards games, Camille, but I will definitely be box score watching. And yeah, I mean, my ideal scenario is that Khris plays well Friday night and the Bucks win, and that Khris continues to play well throughout kind of the remainder of this season and stays healthy, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think we all just want him to not have an off season where he's dealing with surgeries and rehabs and all that, and that gets his value to a place where the Wizards can trade him to a place where he can maybe contend, preferably not
Hopefully
Boston. Preferably not Boston. Yeah. Although that's maybe that maybe the only thing that could make me, like the Celtics a little bit more would be if Khris Middleton was in Boston. So, but let's not do that. So yeah, definitely interesting. I mean, weird that Khris Middleton and Marcus Smart, right? Talk about like guys associated as kind of like, these winner type players from, the Celtics and Bucks, that they both somehow are on the Wizards now of all teams. So who knows what that means for the Wizards' competitiveness, but given their incentives, they didn't seem to be in a rush to get Khris on the floor. So they must think Khris is good, because they didn't want him playing for the last few games coming off of the trade. So we'll see. And of course, the other side, I mean, Kyle Kuzma returning to Washington for the first time since the trade. Hopefully he doesn't try to get too, go into too much of a revenge mode. Although I don't know what like revenge he needs to take against the Washington Wizards. Like, he got to take a ton of shots and put up stats, and they gave him a contract extension. Like, I don't know, like, Kuz has a whole lot to like prove people wrong or whatever. But yeah, so prove to people tomorrow night, Kuz, that who said you couldn't be a team first guy and a guy that fit in, right? Be a nice team player. So we'll see. But yeah, tonight I'm not gonna lie, Camille, like when that game was seemingly slipping away, I was like, man, did the Bucks like, use the one game from Giannis in this back-to-back against the Clippers in a loss, and now you're gonna go into Washington, and like, who knows what happens if Dame and Giannis, if they are both rested, like that game becomes like a total toss-up. So yeah, really important to grab this win, because as we've talked about, I do not want to drop out of that 4 or 5 spot in the East, and preferably it would be nice to be in the 4 spot, not the 5 spot. Absolutely. But I think the Pacers are going to keep plenty of pressure on the Bucks to have to keep up with them now, right? Since Bucks now have some ground to make up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a fun game. I don't think I've ever anticipated a Wizards game this much. Well, since this new era of Wizards basketball has started. So it should be fun. I'm actually going to be on the Brew Hoop playback, watching the game live. So if you guys are interested in watching the Bucks game live with me and Van and some other guests as well, head over to the Brew Hoop playback for that Wizards game. And I think it's a good place for us to wrap up here today. As a reminder, if you have not yet already, sign up for the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, the free newsletter at lockedondaily.com. For Frank and myself, we'll catch you later. Thanks for tuning in.